my heels may not have ever touched the ground this entire run.
Today, we're going to be comparing 3 of the hottest road racing super shoes currently on the market. We have, of course, the venerable Nike Alphafly 3s. We have the Adidas Adios Pro 4s. And most recently, we have the Puma Fast R Nitro Elite 3s. That's a mouthful, so we're just going to call these the Fast R 3s. Now, each of these shoes takes their own approach to incorporating a carbon composite plate or component along with their own specialized foam. And there are already dozens, if not hundreds of videos on YouTube and anywhere else breaking down the specs of each of these shoes. So I'm not going to spend too much time doing that. What I'm going to do instead is break down the key differences between each of these in terms of their construction and their execution of what they're doing with this technology and how that might possibly work. Now, before we get too far into that, brief background for some of you guys, since I have a feeling that this may find an audience that I have not met before. Nice to meet you, by the way. My name is Tyler. I started my first business, Titanium Fitness, 13 years ago, teaching people about nutrition and training online. I've done that ever since. Along the way, I've competed in natural bodybuilding, earning my pro card at a pretty young age, and powerlifting, where I held a couple of state level records for a little bit way back when. I have started running consistently around 2021, kind of height of COVID, where it was harder to be in a gym all the time. So I've run consistently since then, but I would say I'm still pretty much a novice because I didn't take it seriously or didn't pursue seriously the improvement in speed or endurance until probably this last year, maybe year plus. If it's important, I do weigh about 190 to 195 pounds in the morning. So I am heavier than your typical runner, and that will affect the way that some of my gear, some of my shoes especially, respond to the load that I'm subjecting it to. Another aside that is probably relevant for this video is that for about 5 years, I was the chief operating officer of a materials technology company that specialized in carbon fiber composites, very much like the materials you see in the plates or rods of these shoes. While that technology was not my responsibility or my work, I had the unique privilege of learning from people who are much smarter than me about that technology, how those materials work, and how you might apply it to real-world applications. So first up, we're going to go with the Nike Alphafly 3. We're going to go through all these shoes kind of top to bottom, more or less. So top down, this upper is kind of this knit material, very breathable, very comfortable. It's got what you'd call maybe an integrated tongue. It basically feels like you don't have a tongue on this shoe, so that does help with the comfort. The laces on the Alphafly 3 are phenomenal. It has these kind of notched laces that they really grip each other when you lace them up. I don't really feel like I need to double knot these. I always will anyway, but I feel like if I just went with a regular knot, it would hold the entire time I'm running, even for my longest runs. You do have in the midsole, obviously, Nike's foam. You have these Air Zoom pods, 2 underneath your kind of distal midfoot, kind of forefoot area there. However, well, you can see that you do have a full length carbon plate running through the midsole. My use of this shoe so far, I've got about 90 miles in these. I've done every kind of run. I ran my first half marathon in these shoes. That was a lot of fun. I was very injured. It's a good memory. But I ran my first half marathon in these shoes. I've done all kinds of stuff. Tempo runs, I've done strides, I've done long, easy stuff just to get some experience in a shoe like this. And it's been a lot of fun. This was my first exposure to a quote unquote super shoe. I did run in these through last winter into this summer, so it's seen a lot of variance in conditions as well, as cold as 30 degrees, pouring rain, and as hot as 100 plus in the summer. So this has been through pretty much everything. My notes on this shoe. This is a very comfortable upper. Plenty of room at the forefoot. You can kind of see how it flares out a little bit. There's a lot of volume in there for your toes to spread out. And if your foot does expand throughout the course of a longer run or a race, you've got space in there, and the upper is pliable enough to accommodate that. It does still, even with that comfort, feel secure enough for the longest runs that I do. One thing that is definitely noteworthy with this is that it's very loud, to the point that it almost feels a bit ridiculous if you're running. I run around my neighborhood a lot. There's a few parks that I pass by, and I know when I run through the park or around the park, people are looking around wondering what that noise is, or they know it's me and they think that there's something wrong with my shoes. These feel good, these feel stable. Even when I'm fatigued, my form is falling apart. There's enough width underneath the entire foot to keep me from everting and inverting too much. As far as durability, the midsole and the snappiness of the foam doesn't seem to have changed too much. The outsole, you can kind of see this. I do tend to kind of distal midfoot strike, if you will, so right around this area. And you'll see on that lateral edge is where I have most of my wear. So on that outsole, that rubber piece here, you do see the most wear. Around 90 miles, on the other shoe, you can kind of see the outsole, that little strip of rubber on the heel, the lateral side, delaminated. And it kind of just looks like the glue failed and it started peeling away from the foam of the midsole. That's all I thought it was. And when I contacted Nike, they encouraged me to send them in to be inspected, which I did on my own dime. I sent them in, cost me some amount of money to send them back to Nike. And after about a couple of weeks, I got a message back from them. And I did speak to 3 different people at Nike, all of whom confirmed that as far as Nike is concerned, this constitutes normal wear and tear and is not a material defect. Considering my wear pattern, where most of my wear of my shoe is going to be up here in that kind of distal midfoot area, that seems incorrect to me. That doesn't seem like normal wear and tear for this to delaminate back at the heel. I still believe this is more likely a defect and not really representative of the shoe as a whole. If we had 100 pairs of these, I don't believe many of them would break this way. However, it is disappointing the way this was handled, and it's tough to justify a $295 price tag if this is considered normal, that around 90, maybe 100 miles, we should expect these shoes to delaminate at the sole. Moving on to the Adidas. The Adios Pro 4s have this nice synthetic upper. It kind of looks like ripstop. It's not. It just looks like it is. But it's structured enough where at the toe box you can see a little bit of reinforcement. You maintain the structure and space there so that's not kind of collapsing into or around your toes. You do have these bands. It's hard to see on this colorway, but there's these bands of material reinforcement that come around here into your laces on both sides of the shoe. And then there's an interesting component here back at the heel, pretty unstructured, a little bit of padding, and you have this tab. I just thought this was a nice detail back there. You can see it says, "This too shall pass." Laces, nothing special, nothing to write home about. The tongue is gusseted to prevent it from kind of bunching up. As far as the midsole or sole design, you do have that rocker position a little bit further back to really encourage you to get up onto your toes or roll into your forefoot. The foam in these is definitely softer than previous iterations. I know a lot of people talked about with the Adios Pro 3s, they were pretty firm and they would get soft as you break them in. These feel pretty soft from the get, so they've been very comfortable underfoot. On the outsole, you have a tiny bit of Continental rubber. Just this little strip is Continental. The rest of the sole, though, is covered in a very thin layer of what I believe is polyurethane, basically another type of rubber. And so far, it's holding up pretty well. Now, Adidas takes a different approach, a less conventional approach to their carbon composite. If you look down in here in that split portion of the midsole, you can see a few rods there. So what they have is carbon composite rods that are meant to kind of mimic the structures of your foot. If you'll indulge me while I nerd out a little bit here. So Adidas' approach to carbon composite integration is basically dependent on this principle. If we pretend that this notebook were a carbon composite plate, I know it's not, it's a notebook, but just pretend for me. As we bend or deform that plate, what we have is on the convex side, we have material that is being stretched, elongated, so it's under tension. And on the concave side, we have material kind of being squished together in compression. Materials like carbon composites that are resilient enough to want to kind of snap back into their original form will do so with force that is proportionate to their tensile and compressive strength. So basically, its resistance to compressing and resistance to stretching will help it bounce back or snap back to its original shape. Some of this is just that, it's the material strength. Some of that, though, is geometry. So if we were to have a plate that is just, top layer is here, bottom layer is here, it has so much force there. Now, imagine if I could separate this topmost layer where it is further apart from the bottommost layer, and we deform again. If we have a bigger gap there, we also have then is exaggerated or more elongation on that top side, convex side, and more compression on that bottom side. In order for that to really matter, the materials would still need to be connected somehow. And that becomes a geometry problem. So in the case of Adidas, their carbon composite rods are essentially doing that, where they are creating more space between the most concave and most convex surfaces, essentially using the existing strength of the material in a way that could be more efficient. I do really appreciate Adidas' attempt at innovation and doing something a bit different. My use in these guys so far, I've got about 80, well, I know exactly, I have 81 miles in these shoes. I've run in these almost exclusively for a few weeks after getting them. And I've done all kinds of runs, everything, just like the Nikes, I've done everything from strides, tempo, long runs, easy runs, etc. There's even a minute where I was using these instead of daily trainers for some of my normal stuff. My notes on this shoe is that this is very comfortable for me. I think that might be specific to me. This just fits me really well. It's narrow through the midfoot, which doesn't bother me at all. The toe box does give me enough space for my toes to spread out, and if my foot does swell, still feels fine. I will say the only thing that's a bit uncomfortable is that heel being so unstructured. It's a little finicky getting your foot into the shoe, and the same sort of deal with the tongue. I have noticed, and I'm pretty sure, like I've double, triple checked, I'm pretty sure it's not that the tongue is bunching up, but I have had a couple of sessions where I started to get a little bit of a hot spot early in a run, right where I'm tying my laces. So I would just untie them and retie them, and they'd be fine. But I've only experienced that in this shoe, not in the other two. In theory, if you're looking at the sole geometry of this shoe, this should be less stable than, say, the Nikes. I have not noticed this as much because, like I said earlier, I tend to strike kind of distal midfoot in this area. So the amount of width that I have of the heel doesn't really matter to me too much unless I get really, really lazy. I could imagine, however, if you are kind of a heel striker or if you are a midfoot striker who transitions into heel striking as you get tired and sloppier, this may not be your favorite shoe just because it is going to be pretty skinny through the heel. This feels a little bit less snappy, a little less responsive than the Nikes, but it is, in my opinion, more comfortable, especially over longer distances. There's no point where this feels uncomfortable. A good way to think about this is that the Adios Pro 4s feel as if they're kind of encouraging me to move quickly, whereas the Alphas feel like they're almost pushing me to go faster, if that makes any sense. The durability of these guys has been phenomenal. If you were to look at the bottom of the shoe, aside from the fact they're not just super clean and pristine, you can't actually see any wear even after 81 miles. And again, keeping in mind that I'm kind of a heavier runner. The foam of the midsole feels maybe a little bit less responsive than it did when they were new. That to me is not a huge deal. I think these shoes for me might end up being something that I use a lot in training, not so much in races. I've yet to really decide. But if that's the case, this is still a great shoe, and the durability or the change in the characteristics of the foam doesn't bother me too much. Going into the Puma Fast R3s. These are a crazy looking shoe. The upper is this kind of synthetic material, very thin, very light. I'd almost compare it to the tongue especially. When I first felt this, I thought to myself that it reminds me a little bit of rice paper. Obviously not that thin and fragile. It seems pretty strong, but it is extremely thin, extremely light. Puma certainly has their own special formula that they're using to get the most energy return out of the foam, but the real secret sauce here, if you will, is if you look at their design, they have a split sole where they've removed a lot of material through here and a lot of material back at the backmost portion of your heel. You do have a little bit of rubber at the heel section, just like you do on the Alphaflys, but even smaller, and then a full rubber section through your midfoot, forefoot area. Aside from just shaving weight wherever they could, the other interesting thing that they did here is they have a full-length carbon plate that actually extends. You see this little nub there? It extends past the front of your toe box. And this, just like Adidas, I really appreciate the attempt at innovation. So what they've done is taken a much simpler approach. They're still using a conventional carbon plate. They've just increased the length of this lever, essentially so that with the same amount of load, exact same mechanics, nothing about you has to change, you could theoretically get more energy return out of that shoe because of that longer lever. Again, we don't know if that's really true without breaking the shoe down and testing in a lab. We'll circle back to that in a minute. But it's a really cool idea that they've incorporated, and I really appreciate the effort to innovate. My use for these guys so far, I only have about 24 miles in these, which is not a ton, but I've done a decent variety of speeds. I did even a long, easy run just for shits to see how it felt, and it didn't feel amazing. But for my faster stuff, it did what it was supposed to do. My notes on these as far as comfort, these are definitely narrower through the entire shoe. They're just narrower. They do tend to be a bit long. I have pretty long, narrow feet anyway. But even for me, with my long, narrow feet, I've got some space at the front of the toe box. I wouldn't be able to size down, though, without losing space for my toes to have enough width there. So if you have wide feet, this is probably not a good fit for you. If you have normal to narrow or longer feet, probably will be okay. These do definitely feel like they fit a bit snugger, almost like they're sucked in on your foot. It's not a bad thing at all. Even in my longer runs, it was comfortable enough for the whole thing as far as the upper. You would think, looking at this sole, that this would be extremely unstable. I don't notice that as far as lateral stability so much. And even with that split sole, that doesn't bother me a whole lot. The interesting thing, though, is I did notice that if I were walking, I've noticed this first when I was walking, and then I intentionally ran for a little bit trying to heel strike. And I'm pretty sure if you heel strike, you could actually get to a point where as that sole squishes under your heel, you create a negative angle where your heel is actually lower than your toes. So you do have to really stay up on your toes or forefoot area when you're running in this shoe in order for you to get the most out of it. Of the three, this is definitely the shoe that feels the fastest, the snappiest. I think that it's probably as much energy return as the Nikes, as the Alphaflys, if I had to guess. The big difference between those two shoes, or this shoe and the Nike, is that this is so light. So it gets the benefit of being both. It is very powerful as far as its return of energy into your stride, but it's also super light, so you don't have to use as much energy to turn over. That comment I made earlier, how the Adidas feel like they're encouraging you to move, and the Nikes feel like they are pushing you. These shoes feel like they might outrun me if I don't move my feet fast enough. Seriously, in some of the faster efforts, I felt like, I was certainly running faster than I would have at the same degree of effort, so that was cool. But I also felt like if I wasn't on my shit, if I wasn't focused, the shoes might actually outrun me. It's a weird feeling. Because these only have 23 miles on them, it'd be unfair for me to evaluate them in the same way as the Nikes and the Adidas. But I will say, of the three manufacturers, Puma is the only one to actually publish a rating for durability. They claim that these are going to be good for 300 kilometers or about 186 miles, which, if that ends up being true, that is about double what I got out of the Nikes, and to be determined for the Adidas, but that's pretty solid for a shoe that is meant for racing. Something I found really interesting when I was doing my research for this video is this study, 2017, Hukemer et al. I'm sure I'm pronouncing that name wrong, by the way, I'm sorry. But Nike commissioned this study in 2017 to compare their prototype. I believe this is a prototype for what would have been the Vaporfly Next Percent. Comparing that to their current flagship and an Adidas flagship shoe. What they saw was an improvement in running economy of 4% between their prototype and the next best. Now, preprint, but a 2025 study from Kosmeski et al. Interesting note here, that research team also included Hukemer, the original lead author for that 2017 study. They ran it in a very similar fashion to the 2017 Nike study, but they included their Fast R2, so the previous iteration of their latest flagship. They included the Nike Alphafly 3 and the Adidas Adios Pro Evo. And all of those shoes were within 1% of each other for running economy, which would indicate that current gen, all of the best shoes are going to be about the same. They're going to perform about as well. With the one exception of their latest greatest, this Fast R3, which is also included in that study. What they saw was about 3.5% improvement in running economy compared to all of those other options. So including their last gen, including Nike's Alphafly 3, and including Adidas Pro Evo. How reliable are these claims, are these conclusions? It's really hard to say. When you're reviewing research, They won't, of course, claim this as a conflict, but you have people from each company on the research teams for each of these studies. So in the Nike study, there were Nike staff members who were part of the research team. In the Puma study, there were Puma staff members who were on the research teams. And as much as they will try to avoid bias, I'm sure there's got to be some there. That said, I just really love seeing the level of competition, pettiness, you might even say, in academia. It's a little bit funny to me, something that's so serious, but also, I don't know, there's a bit of lightheartedness to me in that they basically ran the same study, or a very similar study. They even hired some of the same researchers just so they could have what seems to be an apples to apples comparison for the consumer's sake. The final question here is, which one of these shoes is my favorite? And the answer is, I don't know. The Puma definitely feels the fastest, but running in this shoe, I ran in this shoe for all of my workouts in the past week. And I will say that for my longer effort, my long run especially, it was a little over 13 miles. At some point, and I don't think it's because my technique was breaking down, I tend to pretty consistently, distal midfoot strike even when I'm tired. I don't actually think my heel even touched the ground that entire workout. But what I was going to say is that just the way that this really encourages you to get up onto your forefoot, onto your toes, and kind of hang out there, it was very fatiguing for my ankles and my calves. And that could have just had to do with some of my resistance training from the same week, but I don't notice the same thing from the other two shoes. So I would say this is probably the fastest one. If durability holds up, it's decent value. All these shoes are actually terrible value. They're really expensive, but this is good comparative value. And it's to be determined if this is going to be my favorite race shoe, but I have a strong suspicion that it will be, so long as I don't use it too much in training where it's really beating my ankles and calves in every session. The Nikes, these are fast. These are consistently fast. They're consistently comfortable. Definitely do appreciate how well they've executed this shoe. And I think they have the benefit of many iterations of very effective models before this that culminated in the Alphafly 3. That said, I do think that my experience with their customer service and their assertion that things like this are considered normal wear and tear, not a material defect, that very well may steer me away from Nike shoes unless or until they eventually release something that is demonstrably better than everything else on the market. The Adidas, I'm tempted to say, if I had to say, this might be my favorite, and it's mostly because these are so comfortable, and based on the wear so far, I imagine these might last me another 100 at the very least, maybe more than that. I've really enjoyed running in this shoe. I don't believe this is the fastest of the three here, but definitely for a lot of my training, this one's going to be the one that I reach for pretty frequently. That's all I've got for this one, guys. If you stuck around to the end, I really do appreciate you taking the time out of your day to watch this video. If you're interested in what I'm doing here or you have ideas for future content, please let me know in the comments below. If you want to see more from me, I do post videos about every other week on YouTube. I have a podcast, the Do It Anyway podcast, will be linked down below as well, where I discuss all things fitness, life, and everything in between. So if you're interested in that, check out the links down below. You can find me on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, anywhere that you might find a podcast, we're on there. But yeah, I really appreciate you guys taking the time to watch. I will see you guys next time. Peace.